Alright, people. It's time to talk about the Terminator movies, but don't expect too much original stuff from these movies, because these movies have been critiqued to death, let's be honest. So, jumping into the original Terminator, and yes, this really is the special edition DVD thing. I've done some poking around on this thing. All the stuff that I like about it, I'm sure you can guess, it's just an excellent story of how an unlikely hero, ends up standing up to the big bad guy that you can't really think of any conceivable way to beat, and the bad guy, takes punch after punch after punch and still keeps at them, and yet, through a little bit of luck and very quick thinking, the heroes are, able to conquer it. But what's also impressive is, that they add a mythology to it. You actually end up, in a way, almost root for the bad guy. I think the bad guy is cool, with good reasons for once, and how they managed to do this on just a few $1 million. Although, to be fair, I think at today's value it would be like 25 million, which doesn't sound that cheap if you ask me, but I don't know too much about inflation, so there you go. And then the mythology. I'm a fan of this mythology, the idea of machines taking over our planet in the future, trying to kill us, and then introducing time travel as a big plot element. That's usually interesting to see in movies, even though it does get overdone, but you can argue that almost everything gets so much overdone that it's not worth it, and even then, I think studies have shown that if you really, try to figure out plots of movies or books, I think there's only like 8 to 10 different kinds of plots out there, so, right, yeah. It's not worth complaining about, in my opinion. Yeah. And one thing that was interesting to me was that as I was rewatching this, I actually was able to chuckle a little bit more than I was as a kid. Oh, don't get me wrong, I had my moments where I was laughing here, but I was like, now the joke makes sense versus, I just find it funny, that kind of thing, right? So, that pretty much takes care of what I like about it. Now for a few things that I dislike. This isn't really the fault of the movie, this is a me problem. I don't entirely, click with, Reese and Sarah in this movie. Now, I know that it's been done time and time again in fiction and a fair amount of real life, that when people, go through traumatic events together, it creates bonds between them, and things that normally wouldn't be possible do end up happening. I understand that, and that's an example of what's going on here. We've seen this before, alright? So that's why I can't complain about it that much, but I don't know, it's just rare for me, to fully end up supporting, couples in movies, because a lot of the superhero couples, I generally don't end up supporting, minus the fact that I know that the movie is trying to make me want them to be together, that kind of a thing. I rarely ever fully have it, that kind of a thing. I don't know, I just thought I should mention that, especially given the repetition that happens later on in this franchise, or series of movies, whatever you want to call them. And even though I do like the mythology bit, from my perspective, if you take this movie purely on its own, forgetting about all the sequels, I nonetheless feel like, based on just what we're hearing in this movie, you have a little less faith in it, that kind of a thing, because, like, once the sequels, start adding to it, the story that gets, told in this movie gets spun like, folklore, a legend, that kind of a thing, like how the Star Wars saga, has been rooted into our minds as the classic story of good versus evil. But if you were to just take the original installment purely on its own, there's a lot less to it, in my opinion. And then, I do know that there are all of the sequels, but I nonetheless got that far while I was watching it, and it didn't entirely suit well with me. Now, by the end of the movie, I don't have that complaint anymore, but that's because, I'm focused on Kyle and Reese trying to defeat Arnold. And that kind of a thing. So by the end of the movie, I feel like, that's been, taken care of, but I nonetheless thought I should mention it. So, what do I think about this? Ultimately, I think I'll give this I might be overdoing it, so I'm gonna give it, a perfect 5. Why am I doing that right now and not giving it, 4.5? Well, because I think that the dislikes for it really are me, and I think it's time that I get some movies on this channel to actually get 5 out of 5, because it's not that difficult for a movie to get 4.5 out of 5 in my book, but getting that last little bit, yeah, that can be tough. I don't know. Like I said, maybe it's just me. Now, moving on to T2, I get both because there's different extras, and this supposedly actually has 3 different versions of the movie instead of 2, but so far I've only ever watched this, actually, because supposedly, according to some reviews that I saw online, this supposedly looks better. And don't even get me trying to ask me about how these movies work on Blu-ray. I have no idea. They keep releasing them over and over again. I'm just going to let Zone Isaac and company tell me all that stuff. And like with the first one, what can I say about that movie, that hasn't been said before? They up the game where the hero is now the first Terminator, and the new Terminator is a lot harder to beat because it can shape shift, is definitely more skilled than Arnold, even though this time all the heroes know what they're up against, but also this movie has a bigger budget, so we get better chase scenes, a lot more personality from Arnold, great one-liners, great blow-ups, great fight scenes, great development between the main characters. It just, has everything. It's real nice to see how these characters react and take care of that stuff. Just what can I say about it that hasn't been said before? T2 is just an excellent movie, all things considered. And even though I think I did have a few nitpicks, such as, possibly a couple of the action scenes taking a little too long, the Black Doctor possibly being a little too quick in his change of mind, that kind of a thing. But that's reading into it a little too tough, It's just an excellent movie through and through. What can I say about it as a percent out of 4? Yeah. And if I hadn't given that one 5 out of 5, I'd have people jumping down my throat, yeah. And now we start getting into the interesting part of these things while I talk about the non-James Cameron movies. First of all, talking about Terminator 3. So, like with the other two, it had been 6 years since I had seen this movie. And I remember feeling like there wasn't that much to the movie, that it seemed to be a lot more just about the action scenes, and that John was a lot harder to sympathize with in this. Well, I ended up being right about all that stuff, and I ended up being wrong at the same time, because yes, John was a lot harder to sympathize with in this movie, but the thing was, he actually reminded me of myself in quite a few situations, because I'm at the point where I'm roughly old enough to be equivalent to John's age in this movie, even though I think technically they want him to be, I don't know, just under 30, that kind of a thing, high 20s, whereas I'm in low 20s, but he reminded me a lot more about myself, a lot more negative, that kind of a thing, not really wanting to face up to what he needs to do, even though I actually have a lot more of a choice than he does, that kind of a thing. How he ends up getting into arguments with Arnold and then Kate in here. So even though he isn't as likable, at the same time, I actually get what's going on in his mind. So it was nice to understand that, and then the way that he and Arnold, discuss things, you get the idea that both of them, are of a different mindset now. John's, as I said, more negative and older, but Arnold, you get the idea that his latest bit of reprogramming allows him to do a lot more, because in here, these were actually, you'll hate me for this, I think his best one-liners of the original trilogy. I was laughing my face off for a good amount of this movie, unlike I did in the first. Oh, I was laughing, but it just felt better in my mind, yeah. And his discussions with John, sure, they're negative, but he's just like, step it up, be better. It is time. That was a pretty bad Arnold impression. I can kind of do him, but I think the mic on this iPod will kind of distort it anyway, right? And then as for the movie being all about action sequences, I was right about that, but I actually didn't feel like they were too overdone. I felt that they were actually rather very nicely done, and even allowed Arnold to do his one-liners. That's probably what calmed me down about it. And then also, a hidden message that's going on in this movie, the idea of, you can't fully avoid your fate, even though you can kind of alter it, and that you need to face up to it. The Terminator says these things kind of disconnectly, and then John tries to recap it right at the end. I feel like that's a nice idea, and it's a bit of a bummer that it wasn't talked about that much when this movie was going on, in my opinion. Yeah. And then Kate, now that I'm older, I actually get why she's, freaked out, doesn't want to be in it, but as the movie goes on, she starts, understanding that she's kind of stuck in this situation, and then how she inadvertently ends up actually putting in a decent amount of skill into it. Sure, her and John, don't have the greatest amount of interaction together, but the film alludes to the fact that there's still a good amount of years between where T3 takes place and then the future parts of this franchise. So you get the idea that they have time, to work out their issues and then see how things develop, and that happens to people all the time. Their relationships can go all over the place, because like me and my brother, we got into arguments a lot when we were younger. When we got halfway through high school, we kind of mellowed out, and now we're each doing our own individual niches in life, that kind of a thing. So even though I don't, support them, this movie gives the idea that, it doesn't want us to support them, but it wants to install the knowledge in my mind that these two will be together eventually. So I'm a little more calmer with that. I believe that eventually, when I was watching this, that those two would, work it out eventually. Now, I know that I'm giving this movie the whole bit about didn't totally like it at first, but was better this time around. Well, you gotta remember, it's been a long time since I've seen it, and I've only seen it, one time. Since then, who knows, my opinions with it could change again, but on the casual rewatch, I didn't really have too many problems with it. I don't know, so it'll be interesting to see how I think about this movie down the line, and even then, it does seem like there is an increasing amount of people who go, why were we complaining about this movie? I don't know. Something to think about.